Are you planning to move to Australia, whether it's for work, study, or just to adventure down under? Here are a few key things you need to know. From visa requirements to lifestyle tips, this guide will prepare you for a smooth transition into a life in Australia. I know when I came 5 years ago, I had a few roadblocks and I'm loving every minute of it, but stay tuned to learn more about the cost of living in Australia, visa options, and much more. So firstly, how do you come to Australia? There are a few key visas that a lot of people use. I came personally on a student visa for my bachelor's degree. That was 3 years. People even come for their masters or PhDs. For your PhD, I feel like they even subsidize some of your living expenses, which I'll go into later for normal cases. But one of the most common ones is a student visa, because after that you'll also get to transition into the post-study work experience temporary visa that you can use to stay here. That's 2 to 3 to 5 years depending on the student visa and your situation and your degree, I think. So yeah, the second one is a work visa. Some people also come on a temporary skill shortage visa, which is employer sponsored, or if you have a occupation that's required in Australia, you can look up the SOL list, which is the skilled occupation list in Australia of the occupations they need and how much work experience they require for you to come here. Obviously, there's also the permanent residency visas that people secure if they have relevant work experience, age, and a lot of components. There's a lot of skilled migration visas that allow you to do that after a certain number of years. And if you just want to come for a vacation, there's also visitor visas for short-term stays. I think they're for 3 months, and after that people from certain countries are allowed to stay longer if they do some regional work. It's just going to a small town in Australia and doing some farm work, because they have a lot of farms here. But each visa type has its own requirements, so be sure to check it yourself or talk to a migration agent, which is what I did for my student visa at least. And I also secured a scholarship. So if you are able to talk to your migration agent about scholarships as well, that'd be a good thing to look into. I can go more into how I secured the scholarship in another video, but for now let's stick to this. And if you just want to know for yourself, you can also just go to the official Australian Government Department of Home Affairs website, which has the most up-to-date information. Now the second tip, or the thing you need to know, is obviously cost of living. Everyone knows Australia fosters one of the best quality of lives, and it can become costly, especially if you're in Sydney like me, or Melbourne or Brisbane, which are the other major cities. So just to give you some guidelines on how much you can expect to pay for cost of living. Housing significantly varies on where you live. I feel like everywhere the eastern suburbs are quite expensive to live in, whether that's Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne, that's what I've heard at least. But Sydney and Melbourne will be more pricey than Adelaide or Perth because there's just a lot more density of people here. My rent over the years has varied from $200 to even $400 per week. I know people pay even more, which is so ridiculous, and they'd be living in the most basic place that you could imagine. But it depends on where you live, how many roommates you can afford to live with, and what sort of place do you want. In terms of grocery and dining, even groceries have become really expensive these days. I feel like it has doubled. I used to pay $30 for essentials before per week, but now I think I pay at least $70 per week just on getting essentials. But there are quite a bit of supermarkets, like Aldi is way cheaper to buy from than Woolworths or Coles, because they have discounted prices and off-brand products. You can expect to pay anywhere from $100 to $200 on groceries, and for dining just add 200 more, I think, just to be safe. That's what I do at least. In terms of transportation, public transport is pretty accessible and widespread in urban areas more than they are in rural or towns, but owning a car might be necessary if you are in a town. If you're curious about cost of living in Australia and how expensive Australia is, you can look at how much I spend in a week as a 20-year-old in Sydney videos that I've uploaded before, but obviously they're bit older, so the price of living has increased, but that can give you a bit of a guide of what you can expect to pay. The third thing to note is the healthcare system in Australia. Australia has a world-class healthcare system consisting of public and private sectors, and some of the key points to note, even though it's such a dry topic, is that everyone needs to have private health insurance when coming to Australia. This is from providers like Medibank and corporate health insurance companies. I know there's a lot of them advertising online and comparing the covers that they offer, so you can look more into that. I'm sure your migration agent will put you on one of them if you're applying on a student visa, because you need to be covered. Your health insurance needs to be covered when you're in Australia. Otherwise it gets too expensive. I feel like it's at least $300 whenever I've wanted to see a GP. That's for basic stuff. So if you don't have health insurance, you get no subsidy. I know permanent residents and citizens are eligible for Medicare, which is a public healthcare system in Australia, providing free or subsidized treatment. But obviously you can look into healthcare in Australia and how Medicare works in Australia by searching it online as well. The fourth thing to note is employment opportunities in Australia, and I know this is why a lot of people come to Australia, because it just houses a lot of big companies, and it's also a growing market. After America, I believe it has a robust job market, especially in sectors like healthcare, IT, engineering, and construction, and other areas as well. Like, I work in marketing, and it just has so many jobs from so many great companies, and more companies are opening up in Australia every day. It has a big startup culture as well, because it is a growing market. Some tips for job seekers from me would be research the market. You can look at sites as Seek.com or Indeed or even LinkedIn to see the demand of your job in Australia. Update your resume to Australian standards, which I can make another video about, because I feel like I have so many good tips on how to have a good resume. Every job I apply to, the employer says they picked my resume because it is so well tailored and it's just so attractive. So not only is it good to have an attractive resume, it's also good to have a resume that meets Australian standards. And to seek more employment opportunities, networking scene is pretty big in Australia. You can leverage platforms like LinkedIn and attend your industry events that will connect you with like-minded people or people in your field simply. I even go to startup events by StartMate, Fish Burners, and you can meet industry leaders there, making such a big change in the job market, and it could be a great way of meeting people as well. This video is also inspiring me to make a video on how to find a job in Australia, because I think that's such a struggle for a lot of people, and to be honest, I feel like I've kind of figured it out. So subscribe to my channel and I will get to that. And also let me know in the comments which one of these videos would you like to see first. The fifth thing to note is the cultural aspect in Australia. Understanding the Australian culture will help you to transition smoothly and integrate with people here. As we all know, Australians have a pretty strong language and slangs that they use. English is the official language, but Australian slang can be quite unique. For example, arvo means afternoon and brekkie means breakfast. Everything's quite like a cute nickname, and sometimes you'll have to ask people what they mean when they say OJ, and it simply just means orange juice, but you had no idea what they were talking about before. But after you live here for a while, you catch on to that, and I feel like I even picked up the Australian accent, and a lot of people doubt if I'm from Australia, but I'm really not. I feel like you just pick it up when you're here, especially if you're conversing with Australian people and living in areas that are predominantly affluent. Going into more of the Australian lifestyle, it's obviously pretty beachy. That's all we see in ads when we see Australia. And work-life balance and outdoor activities is a big aspect. People love having long weekends, which means Friday will be off. I think it's every month or every other month. Don't quote me on that. Look at the public holidays in each state, because each state has different public holidays. But long weekends are a thing because people love to go to the beach, people love to have barbecues. Sport is a big thing in Australia as well, and that's the Australian way of life. I'm talking more generally, but you get the idea. Now, talking about the Australian etiquettes, I feel like Australia is pretty easygoing in most aspects. People expect you to be on time, but dress code is normally smart casual. It's not very formal, and Australians do tend to speak more informally, but they are pretty friendly too. This is obviously a basic 101 into Australian culture and life in Australia, but I hope it gave you some insight on it. Going into more of the climate and geography, Australian climate varies from state to state. Northern Australia tends to be tropical with wet and dry seasons. Like Cairns and Queensland are more hotter, but it gets more tropical when you go up. Southern Australia has temperate climate with 4 distinct seasons, and Central Australia is desert climate with hot days and cold nights. This is very remote areas, so I think most people won't be going to that. Most people are going to Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, or Gold Coast, Queensland. Queensland is more hotter than Sydney. Sydney has a pretty temperate climate. South Australia would be more cold. Melbourne is a bit more cold than hot, but obviously every state has their hot and cold days. Perth, I know, has a very good climate as well, so yeah, it differs from state to state and city to city. Don't expect it to be hot all the time. Prepare for the specific weather patterns in the city that you're going in, and always stay sun safe because the ozone layer is a bit destroyed here, so you can get sunburnt pretty badly and it causes sun cancer very easily. Australia is the leading country with skin cancer, so always carry SPF with you. If you look up Australian climate or weather in Australia of the city or region that you're moving to, you should be able to find that information and prepare the necessary clothes that you need to come here. For the educational system in Australia, for the families that might be watching, public school is funded by the government and generally free for residents. Private schools charge tuition but offer diverse curriculums, and Australia offers a high standard of education, whether you're studying for school or in uni, so I feel like it's always beneficial to study here. Higher education here is obviously home to renowned universities and institutions, and you should be able to find a really great uni for the course you want to study. The last thing I want to mention is the essential services in Australia that you will need to set up when you're here. Upon arrival, here are a few things and services you'll need to set up to get going. You'll need a bank account. The most common banks are CommBank, NAB, Macquarie Bank, to name a few. I'm with CommBank because that's the most common or popular one, I would say, one of the popular ones. And you can open a local bank account in a day. You can just go there and open one to manage your finances, and then you can put it in your Google Wallet or your Apple Wallet, and most places offer tapping your digital card and you can pay anywhere. We're pretty cashless, which can be quite convenient but also very pricey because we just keep tapping everywhere. You would also need a TFN, which is a tax file number, essential for working and paying taxes. Whether you're working anywhere, you will need to pay tax in Australia, whether that's in a cafe or in a school or wherever. Even tutoring, you'll need a tax file number so you can be taxed correctly. Other essential services like dentist appointments and optical appointments can be quite pricey, so make sure you got that sorted out so that you don't need to do it much in Australia because it is quite pricey and you don't get Medicare. And most of private health insurance doesn't cover optical or dentist appointments, so make sure to sort that out in the country that you're living in or you're coming from. Until you get Medicare, I feel like it's such a waste of money. Also, getting your hair done here is pretty expensive. So just to list out a few essential services, I feel like you should be aware of what's reasonable and not when you come to Australia. And in terms of rent and utilities, when you get set up with the home you want to live in Australia, you can find a lot of them on flatmates.com or Facebook Marketplace, or even Gumtree. That's an app here. Most places include utilities if you're just in a share house, but if you are renting your own home, for that you'll need to go to realestate.com.au. You'll need to set up electricity, gas, water and internet bills to be paid on top of rent. So those were all my tips. Moving to Australia is an exciting filled adventure with new opportunities and experiences. By understanding the essentials, visa requirements and cultural norms, you'll be well prepared to start your new life down under. Let me know if you have any questions. Follow me on Instagram to check out my life here, and stay tuned for the next video.